run a bit over, so I'm going to have to give everyone else somewhere around 10 minutes. But let me remind the panelists, okay, we've got to close down here at 5 o'clock. So I know that people want to inquire and pose questions to you. Chris Hellman.
Thank you, Congressman, and Cape Cod Peace Justice for pulling this together and for inviting me down here. When I took public speaking in high school, I first encountered the phrase "tough act to follow." What we do at National Priorities Project is we look at the federal budget, and we look at it in such a way as to break it down and make it understandable to people so they can see what the federal government does on their behalf or doesn't do on their behalf, and how it touches them at as intimate a level by localizing the numbers and giving you a way to understand what it is that the government is doing with your tax dollars. Okay, sorry. Is doing with your tax dollars. When we look at the cost of the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, we come to the sobering realization that somewhere later this summer, the total cost of the two wars will reach $1 trillion. We'll get back to $1 trillion in a little bit. But one of the things that we want to talk about is, okay, first and foremost, you don't make decisions about going forward with wars or ending them or entering into them based on the cruelty of the dollar figures. There are other cruelties that are much more important. Having said that, however, it's very clear that when you start talking about orders of magnitude of $1 trillion, there's an economic impact to this decision-making process. And that's one of the things that we want to talk about. That $1 trillion figure is interesting to me because we just spent a good 6 months beating ourselves up over what we were going to do on healthcare reform. And one of the questions about healthcare reform was, well, how are you going to pay for it? Interestingly enough, what President Obama suggested at the beginning of the debate, his ambitious healthcare reform program, complete with the public financing concept, the whole rigmarole, about $940 billion over 10 years. Substantially less than the $1 trillion that we will have spent over the last 9 years. And before you leave, if you have an opportunity, one of the things that I've done, and I didn't prepare enough, which is probably the first time this has ever happened, is a fact sheet. National Priorities Project tallies costs of war through September. And what we've done is break out the costs of the wars at the national level, state level, the 10th Congressional District, Barnstable County, and Falmouth. So you can see what the cost of these wars has been right into your communities. This year the administration has already appropriated about $140 billion for wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Of that, about 72 is purely for Afghanistan. That doesn't include the $33 billion that we know is coming. So this year's tally for Afghanistan will probably be close to $100 billion. This is the first year that Afghanistan will exceed Iraq in cost. Next year, they're already looking at $160 billion for the two wars, although they haven't told us how that's going to break out exactly. But that $160 billion is, I suspect, going to break out in the same sort of ratio, with Afghanistan getting about $100 billion and Iraq getting a little less. That $160 billion is an interesting figure when you compare it to what the administration has proposed for other areas of federal spending in the coming fiscal year. First is food assistance programs will get about $132 billion. These are things we spend on food and nutrition programs like food stamps, school lunches, and the WIC program. Less than the $160 billion. If you're interested in Homeland Security, the budget for that will be $72 billion this year, less than half of what we will spend in Iraq and Afghanistan next year. That $160 billion is almost twice what we will spend on education in this country next year. And if we want to talk about education for just a little bit, let's take that $160 billion and let's split it up. If you've got a kid who's looking at college or in college, you've probably heard of something called the Pell Grant program. It allocates up to $5,500 per student per year in grant money from the federal government. If you wanted to, You could increase that Pell Grant award by 50%, raise it up to $8,250 a year, and give it to every single college student in this country and not spend $160 billion. That's 19 million college students. Spending a little bit more time on education. The Massachusetts cost of the war in Afghanistan cumulatively is $8.4 billion. That's enough to pay a full 4-year tuition for all incoming freshmen at the University of Massachusetts for the next 25 years. So let's talk a little bit about what $1 trillion is, because it's a number that we hear it, but we don't fully understand it. So I've come up with a couple of little mental devices to help you understand it. First off, it's a 1 with 12 zeros after it. That doesn't really mean anything. But if you were to take it and turn it into $1 bills and lay them end to end, it would make a string of $1 bills 94 million miles long. That's the distance to the sun. It's 208 times the distance to the moon and back. If you made $1 million a year salary, you would have to work 1,000,000 years to earn $1 trillion. If I handed you $1 a second repeatedly, it would take me 32,000 years to give you $1 trillion. If they were in silver dollars, they would weigh 80 million tons. So these are the things we know about the costs of Afghanistan and Iraq. And we have these fact sheets that we prepared. Hopefully they're enough for you to at least see one before you do. If you haven't, and what we've done is do these types of trade-offs so that you can understand the impact that this level of spending can have in your community. If you don't get one and you'd like to see the materials, please follow up with me after the meeting. We'll swap contact information, and we'll see that happens. Thank you again for your time.